not broken. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not an idiot for feeling tired of pretending all the time. You are perhaps right in the middle of a process that nobody warned you was going to begin. A silent process. One that's going to make you look at people you always thought were naive and start questioning the judgment you yourself made of them. There's a specific person somewhere in your life. It could be a grandmother, a quirky coworker, a quiet neighbor, someone you laughed at lightly in recent years. Someone who trusts too much, who forgives too quickly, who helps without asking for anything in return. You always thought they were kind of foolish. But there are days, usually when exhaustion hits, when you catch yourself thinking that maybe they're living better than you are. That bothers you. And that's where this video begins. What you're about to hear may be uncomfortable, and maybe you really need it. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Maybe you've never heard of him, or maybe you've seen the name on the cover of some thick book. But the ideas that are going to come up here don't require any reading resume. They ask for only one thing: honesty when looking at yourself in the mirror. Because everything he wrote talks about one single thing, and that thing doesn't need a diploma to be understood. For those who've never read a single line, what follows will work like a conversation. For those who have read him, it'll work like a rereading. Both end up in the same place. Before explaining what this man saw, you need to understand where he was speaking from. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow in 1821. The son of a strict military doctor and a sickly mother who died young. While still a young man, he joined a group of intellectuals who debated social reforms in a country ruled by an authoritarian czar. He was reported, arrested, and sentenced to death. On a winter morning, he was led out to an execution courtyard, blindfolded, and placed in front of a firing squad. At the very last moment, before the shot, an officer arrived on horseback, bringing the commutation of his sentence. The execution was staged. The whole thing had been a piece of psychological theater put on by the regime. But the fear, the farewell to his own life, the physical sensation of death, that part was real. At 28, Dostoevsky died inside and came back. After that, he was sent to a prison in Siberia, where he spent years surrounded by murderers, thieves, and desperate men. He came out a different man. Later in life, he would lose a small child, bury his first wife, and live hounded by debts and by epileptic seizures that knocked him to the floor without warning. He wasn't an armchair philosopher. He was someone who knew suffering from the inside, on a set schedule, with a baptismal name, with an address. And it was precisely because of that torn-up biography that he managed to see, before almost anyone else, a silent disease that was beginning to spread through 19th century Europe. A disease without a virus, without fever, without coughing. A disease made of an oversized head and a tightened heart. A disease that 2 centuries later hit its peak inside your apartment, inside your car, inside your phone. Dostoevsky's central thesis is simple and brutal. Modern man is a sick person who thinks he's healthy. We think we're smarter than our grandparents, more informed, freer, more connected, and, in a sense, we are. The problem is that along with all this intelligence came an anxiety no previous generation had known at this intensity. A strange loneliness, even in the middle of a crowd. An emptiness that shows up when the phone shuts off, when the noise stops, when the distraction ends. Anxiety disorder rates among young adults break records year after year. People's trust in one another has collapsed in nearly every developed country. Self-reported happiness among teenagers plummeted right around the moment the smartphone became a part of the body. We're not imagining things. There's a real malaise spread out in the air, and the central symptom of this sickness, according to Dostoevsky, has a very specific shape. It's the hypertrophy of consciousness. It's thinking too much and feeling too little. It's analyzing everything, predicting everything, calculating everything, and losing along the way the ability to simply live. In 1864, he published a short, strange book, narrated in the first person by a nameless man. The text is called Notes from Underground. The narrator lives alone in a damp basement in St. Petersburg, writes for nobody, talks to an imaginary listener, and spends entire pages humiliating himself, bragging about himself, contradicting himself. He's intelligent. He notices everything. Every gesture of his own, every gesture of others, every micro-expression at a dinner party, every small slip in a conversation, all of it is decoded by him in real time. And precisely because of that, he becomes incapable of anything important. He can't love. He freezes up before acting, and he loses the ability to simply be happy in a single moment without reviewing it 1,000 times. Consciousness, taken to the extreme, paralyzes. The Underground Man is a warning, an advanced portrait of a figure who is common today. You probably know someone like that. Someone who knows everything, reads everything, comments on everything, and yet seems trapped inside their own head, unable to take a single real step in any direction. It might be a friend. It might be a colleague. It might be, on certain bad days, you yourself in the bathroom mirror before going to bed, rehearsing a conversation that isn't going to happen the next day. This character embodies the first inversion that Dostoevsky wants to call out. The modern world thought that more consciousness would bring more life. It brought the opposite. It brought life cast in plaster inside an infinite mirror, where every movement has to be reviewed, justified, optimized, compared. Social media has cranked this up to a level he couldn't even have imagined. You post a photo and sit there watching the like count. You send a message and wait for the seen notification. You set up a coffee date and you're already planning how you're going to come across at the coffee date. Consciousness, instead of serving life, has turned into a cage. And worse than that, a cage with cameras on every side. Stop and think for a moment about what screens are doing to people's inner lives. We're losing the ability to be alone without a distraction. We're losing the ability to pay full attention to a single face during a conversation. We're losing the ability to be bored, and boredom is the gateway to real imagination. Kids today reach for the phone before a thought even has time to form. Adults do the same thing in elevators, in lines, in waiting rooms, in bathrooms. Every micro-interval of life has been filled in, and inside that filling in, the digital underground man was born. A resident of a closed-off room, even when the room is a packed subway car. Along with that hypertrophy of the head came another inversion, maybe even more dangerous, the cult of cleverness, the silent contempt for goodness. Stop and listen to the vocabulary used in adult conversations today. Whoever trusts is a sucker. Whoever forgives is weak. Whoever helps without charging is a fool. Whoever's honest when they could have lied is unprepared for the world. Whoever shows emotion in public is being dramatic. The cold person is admired. The calculating person is respected. The ironic person is applauded. And whoever insists on being good, with no air quotes around it, gets pushed into a corner like an endangered species. Dostoevsky watched that inversion start to take root in the Europe of his time, under the influence of philosophical currents that promised to free man from the old morality in exchange for a new kind of rationality, cold and efficient. He realized, before almost anyone else, that this trade wouldn't make human beings any happier. It would make them lonelier, more resentful, more incapable of any sincere gesture. Because the cynic, deep down, is someone who has protected his heart with so many layers of armor that he has forgotten how to take the armor off when it's time to receive affection. There's an important detail here. Cynicism sells itself as intelligence, but technically it's the opposite. People with high levels of cynicism, meaning a generalized distrust of other people's motives, tend to have lower lifetime income, lower professional success, and worse mental health indicators when compared to more trusting people. The cynic thinks he's the smartest one in the room. In the end, he's usually the biggest loser in the room, just with a good vocabulary to hide it. And even so, the cynical aesthetic continues to dominate. Movies, TV shows, comedians, social media accounts. Everything rewards the sharp, ironic, sarcastic, slightly cruel tone. The good character is the sophisticated villain. The honest hero becomes a joke. The good guy is boring. The traitor is fascinating. This cultural preference is not innocent. Drop by drop, generation after generation, it teaches us that an open heart is corny and that a closed heart is cool. Dostoevsky would be barely surprised. The phenomenon he described didn't invent anything new, it just modernized itself. And here we get to the book that gives this video its name. In 1869, Dostoevsky published The Idiot. The title is a provocation. The main character's name is Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin. He's just returned to St. Petersburg after years in a Swiss sanatorium where he was being treated for a form of epilepsy. He's gentle, honest, incapable of lying, incapable of holding grudges, incapable of playing the social games. When he enters Russian high society, everyone senses something strange in his presence. The women are intrigued, the men irritated. The sharp tongues start passing around the same verdict behind his back. He's an idiot. But the reader, page after page, notices that something doesn't add up. This idiot sees what nobody wants to see. He sees the hypocrisy of the ladies who smile out of self-interest. He sees the humiliation of the disgraced young woman whom everybody looks at with fake pity. He sees the despair behind the cheerful manner of a bankrupt general, and he doesn't use any of it as a weapon. He just sees and goes on being good. The shock running through the whole book is this: he isn't a fool. He's the only one truly clear-headed in an environment rotting away behind appearances. He's an idiot only in the mouths of others. Why does the world need to bring down a person like this? Why does it need to slap a label of inferiority on them? Here we run into one of the harshest perceptions the Russian author ever had. When someone lives without a mask, without calculation, without ulterior motives, they become an unbearable mirror. Being near that person means being forced, against your will, to look at your own dishonesty. And almost nobody can stand that look. So the collective way out is to root for him to be dumb, to root for him to be naive, to root for him to be out of touch with reality. Because if he's only that, we can keep going as we are. But if he's actually seeing something legitimate, then we're the ones with the defect. And nobody wants to admit that at a Sunday dinner. Dostoevsky's character suffers not because he gets things wrong. He suffers because he gets things too right. He suffers because his truth is too big for a world that has gotten used to living off small, mutually agreed upon lies. This is the heart of the inversion in this video. The label idiot is, very often, the silent indictment of a sick environment. And the one who applies it is, almost always, confessing something about himself without realizing it. Before moving on, hold on to a question that will come back later. When was the most recent moment in your life when you heard someone called an idiot and, secretly, felt like the word was being used wrong? To better understand what Dostoevsky was fighting, you need to know the perfect opposite of Prince Mishkin. That opposite shows up in another book, maybe the most widely read of all his works, Crime and Punishment, published in 1866. The protagonist's name is Raskolnikov. He's a poor, brilliant, proud former student who lives in a tiny little room and goes hungry in St. Petersburg. Big head, empty stomach, inflamed ego. A dangerous combination. Raskolnikov builds a theory inside his own mind. He believes humanity is divided into two categories. The majority, ordinary people, made to obey, to reproduce, to keep the world spinning like a noisy gear. And a minority, the superior men, capable of creating new values, capable of breaking common morality, capable of carrying out acts that would be crimes for others, but that for them would be merely necessary means to a greater end. Napoleon, in his head, is the example. He kills thousands and is called a genius. Some petty thief kills one and goes to prison. The difference, Raskolnikov concludes, lies in who you are, not in what you do. Driven by this theory, and by a confused mix of poverty and pride, he decides to test himself. He kills an old pawnbroker with an axe, inside her own apartment. The old woman's sister walks in by surprise and he kills her too. The crime takes place in suffocating darkness. And then the punishment begins, but not the punishment you might imagine. The police don't even suspect him yet. The punishment is internal. Raskolnikov falls ill. He runs fevers. He has delirious episodes. He flees from people. He gets close to them and flees again. The theory caves in inside him a little more each day. The superior man discovers, with horror, that he's just a man with blood on his hands and a conscience that refuses to shut up. The genius of the book lies in what it foresees. Decades later, in the early 20th century, entire regimes were built on Raskolnikov's same idea. The idea that there are groups of people more evolved than others, more necessary for the future, and that in the name of a better tomorrow, it's permissible to eliminate whoever stands in the way. The 20th century was marked by that logic, taken to its furthest consequences by ordinary, cold, organized bureaucrats capable of mass murder in the name of an abstract theory about who deserves to live. Dostoevsky saw that danger 50 years before it would play out on an industrial scale. His book isn't period entertainment. It's an early warning about what happens when intelligence gets separated from the heart. This character shows, with frightening clarity, Dostoevsky's warning. Intelligence without heart, without love, without humility, is a sharp knife pointed at one's own chest. The more brilliant the reasoning that justifies evil, the deeper the blade goes in. Raskolnikov thinks he's above common morality, and it's precisely that common morality, naive, popular, dumb, that turns out to be the only thing capable of still saving him at the end of the book. You'll see this in a little while. The common root of all of this, according to Dostoevsky, has a name. It's pride. Not the healthy pride of doing your own work well. Not the pride of raising an honest child or taking good care of your aging parents. It's a deeper pride, harder to spot. It's the secret conviction that I'm enough on my own, that I don't need anybody, that I am, deep down, more intelligent, more sensitive, more battle-scarred, more advanced, more aware than the rest. It's the pride that hides inside cynicism, that hides inside irony, that hides inside the constant feeling of being one step ahead of everyone else. This pride is especially modern. In other eras, it was seen as a serious flaw. Today, it's marketed as an asset. Coaches have rebranded it as self-confidence. Social media gurus have repackaged it as winner's mindset. But Dostoevsky's proud man has a marker that always gives him away. He despises the humble, and it's precisely the humble person he observed who can still love wholly, forgive without holding back, apologize without making a show of it, sleep peacefully at night, and wake up feeling light in the morning. The proud man goes to bed rewriting mental speeches. The humble man goes to bed tired and at peace. Who do you think is living better? Most people carry some amount of this disease without noticing. Not enough to kill an old woman with an axe, of course, but enough to be unable to apologize for a poorly placed sentence. Enough to drift away from a dear friend just because of the pride of not making the first move. Enough to spend years stuck in a job that doesn't make sense, just because admitting the mistake would be an unbearable hit to one's self-image. Modern pride doesn't carry an axe. It carries silence. There's a banal scene you might recognize. A couple fights over something silly, said out loud on a tired Monday. One goes to sleep on the couch, the other stares at the ceiling. Both know deep down that the issue is tiny. Both know, if they're honest with themselves, that one short gesture would be enough to put it all behind them. But neither moves. Not out of anger, out of pride. And then a week goes by, and the week becomes 2 months, and the 2 months poison the entire year with a malaise nobody can name anymore. Small domestic cold wars, fought in silence, are one of the most common forms of this modern pride. Nobody yells, nobody breaks a plate. The two just drift apart, millimeter by millimeter, day after day, until one day they discover they've turned into strangers living at the same address. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose work continues to be studied at centers like the Jung Institute in Zurich, wrote that everything we don't bring into consciousness shows up in our lives as fate. Pride is maybe the most well-disguised psychic content of modernity. It camouflages itself as a virtue. It shows up looking like healthy self-esteem, like independence, like self-love. And it only reveals itself late, once the effects are already visible. In relationships broken up over nonsense, in families that don't speak to each other for forgotten reasons, in adults paralyzed by the fear of admitting, even to themselves, that they took the wrong path way back when. There's still another point Dostoevsky touched on that powerfully makes sense again today: the illusion of total freedom. In The Brothers Karamazov, published in 1880, the author's last novel, there's a chapter called The Grand Inquisitor, often cited as one of the most brilliant passages ever written in any language. In it, an old Spanish cardinal speaks alone with Christ, who has supposedly returned discreetly to earth. The old man says, in essence, the following: "The freedom you offered is too heavy a burden. Most human beings can't carry real freedom. They'd rather trade that freedom for bread, for security, for someone to make decisions for them. And that, according to the character, is why we, the church, have had to take on that responsibility in place of the people. We took their freedom away, and in exchange, we gave them rest. They thank us for it." Dostoevsky didn't write that scene to defend the cardinal. He wrote it to call out an eternal temptation. The temptation to trade real life, complicated, free, and full of doubts, for a lighter version, more predictable, more managed by other people. Today, all you have to do is open your eyes. Algorithms decide what you watch. Apps decide which route you take. Platforms decide who you talk to. Brands decide what's trending this month. The modern person has every option and no meaning. Free on the outside and a slave on the inside. A slave to anxiety, to comparison, to other people's opinions, to the next notification. The paycheck rolls in every month, and even so, they can't stop checking their email inbox on Sunday afternoons. They've got the stable relationship, and even so, they feel an emptiness no conversation fills. They have everything, and they don't know what to live for. That's the silent scream of our time. It's worth holding on to one more question for the end. How much of your freedom have you outsourced without realizing it? Who, in fact, is deciding your week? It's important to notice a subtle distinction here. This isn't about demonizing technology. This isn't about proposing some romantic return to life without a cell phone. It's about noticing that there's a real freedom, demanding, costly, that involves choosing on your own, even when no one's watching, even when no algorithm is suggesting anything. And there's a fake freedom, comfortable, that consists of choosing among options other people have selected for you. The first kind of freedom gives meaning. The second gives anxiety. Erich Fromm, the German psychoanalyst who wrote Escape from Freedom after witnessing the rise of totalitarianism in Europe, argued that modern human beings flee real freedom because it comes with the weight of responsibility. According to him, it's more comfortable to surrender to whatever authority happens to be on offer than to carry alone the task of inventing one's own life. Dostoevsky had reached almost the same conclusion about 6 decades earlier, in fictional form, inside The Brothers Karamazov. Behind all of this, the Russian author saw a single inner war. The war between head and heart. The modern world, a direct product of the Enlightenment, taught man to trust only what can be proven, calculated, measured, classified. Anything that escapes that became suspect. Feelings, suspect. Intuition, suspect. Faith, suspect. Beauty, suspect, unless it can be turned into an engagement metric. Compassion, suspect, unless it comes wrapped up in a marketing strategy. But Dostoevsky kept insisting that the most important things in human life don't fit into spreadsheets or formulas. Love isn't proved by a theorem. Forgiveness isn't deduced from a calculation. Beauty isn't proven by an equation. Reducing the human being to the part of him that can be measured is cutting away precisely the part that makes him a human being. It's like that everyday scene at 2 in the morning, when a person is lying in bed with their face lit up by the blue light of a phone, scrolling through endless feeds, and notices, without being able to explain it, that they have a knot in their throat for no clear reason. The body knows something the spreadsheet can't measure. The knot is the part that got left out of the formula. When you calculate everything, in the end, you also calculate what should never have been calculated. You calculate the time you give to your child. You calculate the time you give to your aging parents. You calculate the value of every friendship by the practical return it generates. You even calculate grief, marking on the calendar how many days it's socially acceptable to keep being sad before getting back to normal life. This kind of invisible calculation eats away at the soul, but it's so subtle, so silent, that almost nobody notices the heart is being swapped out for a spreadsheet, cell by cell, year after year. There's a daily scene that illustrates this well. A man comes home from work and his son runs to the door wanting to show him a drawing. He glances at the drawing, says, "Very cool," while typing an important reply on his phone, and heads to the bedroom. That gesture, repeated over the years, communicates something without using words. It communicates that work comes first and the drawing is somewhere below it. The child learns that hierarchy, and worse, learns to calculate himself as an item within it. By 15, he'll have learned not to interrupt. By 20, he'll have learned not to ask. By 30, he'll be reproducing the same pattern in his own living room. There was no cruelty at any moment, just calculation. Just the feeling, common to millions of exhausted adults, that there are things more urgent than looking into the eyes of the person right in front of you. The underground man, without anyone realizing it, kept reproducing himself generation after generation with a packed schedule and a hollowed-out heart. Now go back to Raskolnikov's story. The student has already committed the crime, is already getting sick from fever and guilt, and happens to meet a young woman named Sonia. She's poor, very poor. She lives in a damp little room. She has a miserable family to support, and to get food and medicine, she's been forced into prostitution. In the eyes of society, she's at the bottom rung. In the eyes of the proud Raskolnikov, in any other circumstance, she would be despicable. But Sonia carries something he has lost without realizing it. A whole faith, alive, without theory. A compassion that doesn't calculate. An ability to look into another person's eyes without judging. In one of the most famous scenes in all of literature, Raskolnikov, after a lot of beating around the bush, confesses the crime to her. She doesn't pull back. She doesn't run. She doesn't call the police. She just listens. And then, in silence, reads him a passage from the Gospel, the story of Lazarus, the man who died and was called back to life. She doesn't argue. She doesn't philosophize. She doesn't counter his theories with other, more sophisticated theories. She just reads, in a low voice, and believes. And that slowly begins to open a crack in the student's pride. At the end of the book, Sonia goes with him to Siberia, to the prison. It's she who guides him, without any fanfare, toward an authentic inner transformation. It's the simple one who saves the intelligent one. It's the stupid one who undoes, in silence, what 1,000 sharp theories couldn't undo. It's the woman society despises, who proves to be the only one capable of giving humanity back to a man who thought himself above ordinary humanity. That image is one of the most powerful Dostoevsky left us with. It's no accident that it still appears today on lists of the world's greatest literary scenes. There's a powerful symbolism in that encounter. The educated man, full of words, is disarmed by someone who barely finished a basic education. The prostitute, a figure considered the moral garbage of 19th century Russian society, saves the intellectual, considered the mental aristocracy of that same society. Dostoevsky inverts the entire hierarchy in a single scene. The one closer to reality isn't the one who climbed up, it's the one who bent down. It isn't the one who mastered the world of ideas, it's the one who never stopped taking care of the sick, the hungry, the forgotten. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who devoted his entire life to studying what's hidden in the deepest layers of the human soul, observed something very similar. For Jung, it's precisely in the figures society despises, in the parts we reject in ourselves and others, that the key to healing lives. Whoever learns to look at those figures with respect instead of horror recovers a part of themselves that had been lost. Goodness isn't an aesthetic. It's the most real form of intelligence left over in a world that has learned to fragment itself. And there's an important detail. Sonia isn't a fool. She knows the worst of the human being. She knows humiliation. She knows hunger. She knows everything dirty that life has to offer. Even so, she chooses to believe, chooses to take people in, chooses to love. That's the point. Her goodness doesn't come from ignorance of evil. It comes from a decision made in spite of evil. And that's exactly the kind of goodness Dostoevsky wanted to show us as the highest form of intelligence possible. Pause here for a second. Remember that person you pictured all the way back at the start of the video, the one you always thought was a bit foolish, too naive, too soft. Now you have a name for them. That person is your Sonia. And maybe, without your knowing it, they've been the most clear-headed thing that's passed through your life in recent years. Hold that face in your memory. We're going to come back to it. And maybe there's a question you've been avoiding for a while now, without realizing it. What if the person you most need to learn to listen to again is exactly the one you've learned to call weak? What if the most clear-headed advice in your life isn't going to come from the most successful person you know, but from the one who quietly takes care of everybody, never showing up in the spotlight? Hold on to that question. It'll come back before the end. Another point that needs to be said without sugarcoating it. For Dostoevsky, suffering wasn't a defect to be wiped out at any cost. It was, very often, a doorway. It's in pain, and almost only in pain, that pride breaks. The masks fall off. The illusions dissolve. The person, without the makeup of routine and success, finds out what really matters. Whoever has never really suffered tends to live on the surface of existence, gliding over things like a skater on a shallow lake. It's not wrong to say this, even though it's uncomfortable. A good portion of people who go through major losses report, years later, having developed more depth, more gratitude, more clarity about what's essential. It's not a rule for everyone, but it's a pattern observed by psychologists, therapists, and biographers so frequently that it has become a kind of silent consensus. This isn't praise for pain. Nobody chooses to suffer. This isn't about seeking out suffering or glorifying it or pretending it's beautiful. It's about recognizing a fact observed across every century. A lot of people only begin to see deeply once life knocks down some of their comfortable certainties. Divorce, illness, getting laid off, the death of someone they loved. These moments, terrible as they are, open a rare window inside the person. What they do with that window is up to them, but the window exists. Dostoevsky was an expert on it, because his entire biography was made of windows like that, opened by force. And here another idea comes up that he defended without being afraid of sounding out of style. The idea of faith. It needs to be said carefully, because the word today carries baggage he never used. For Dostoevsky, faith wasn't a rule. It wasn't dogma. It wasn't ticking boxes. It wasn't the canned speech of a packed temple. It was a very deep form of trust in the meaning of life and in other human beings, even in the face of everything that gives reason for disbelief. It was the inner bet that there is something greater than individual calculation, something that holds a person up when all the external supports collapse. Modern man, he observed, has lost that trust, and he tries to replace it with 1,000 other things. With money, first of all, then with professional success, with that illusion that all you need is to land the next title for something inside to finally settle. With political ideology, which offers a clear enemy and a sense of tribe. With endless consumption, with the infinite spectacle dripping from the phone screen during hours of wasted time. With loud causes that get dropped 6 months later. With disposable relationships, photogenically perfect trips, life plans put together like a storefront display. None of that, on its own, fills you up. Not because those things are bad in themselves, but because they've been put in a place that isn't theirs. They've been shoved into a hole shaped differently. The hole is still there, round, patient, waiting to be filled by the one thing that fits inside it. Whoever still believes in something greater than themselves, whether it's God or a sense of purpose or a genuine network of affection, carries less weight through life. Not because they're checked out, not because they see less than other people, but because they're not trying to carry the entire universe on their own back. There's a real difference between people who feel they belong to something larger and people who feel they are the only center of their own meaning. The first kind can cry and still get to sleep. The second kind cries and stays awake until dawn, rewriting excuses to themselves. Regular spiritual practices, in any tradition, show consistent links to well-being, longevity, and mental health. The numbers speak even when the words are uncomfortable. It doesn't matter which tradition. What matters is the inner gesture. It's the posture of someone who recognizes that there is something that transcends them, and that this something deserves silence, attention, devotion. Whoever has a sense of meaning can endure the nearly unbearable. Whoever doesn't collapses even under much lighter conditions. This isn't a faith-based pitch. It's an observation repeated in hospitals, in clinics, in the testimony of survivors of just about anything you can imagine. Dostoevsky lived this same intuition decades earlier, in his case, inside a Siberian prison. It was there, in the middle of common criminals, that he noticed something that would change his entire body of work. The roughest, the most brutalized, the most illiterate of those people, many of them, kept alive inside themselves something that the polished intellectuals of the capital seemed to have lost. An elementary trust in life, an ability to cry without shame, a rough but living faith in something greater than their own fate. He came out of there determined to spend his whole life writing in defense of that rough faith against cold sophistication. And that's exactly what he did, book after book, until the very last one. There's still a third character in Dostoevsky's work who needs to be introduced to round out this picture. In The Brothers Karamazov, that final novel, there are three brothers. Dmitri, sensual, impulsive, a slave to his own passions. Ivan, intellectual, brilliant, tormented, who builds dazzling arguments against the existence of God and against the meaning of life. And Alyosha, the youngest, the one who carries the heart of the story. Alyosha isn't Prince Mishkin. Alyosha isn't pure out of innocence. He has doubts. He loses his faith. He goes through crises of disbelief. He knows evil up close, inside his own family, in the form of a violent father, an alcoholic brother, a hypocritical society. And even so, he chooses to love. Even so, he chooses to serve. Even so, he keeps drawing close to the most difficult people. This is the key point that needs to stay inside you when this video ends. Real simplicity, the kind that has weight, isn't a lack of worldliness. It isn't someone who hasn't yet seen the dirt of the human being. It isn't that nice little classmate who's never been betrayed by anyone and so still trusts everybody. The simplicity that matters is the kind reclaimed after having known complexity. It's going back to trusting with your eyes open. It's choosing kindness not out of inability to see the worst, but as a conscious decision in the face of the worst. There's a big difference between two innocences. The first is the innocence of the child who hasn't been hurt yet. That first innocence is beautiful, but fragile. It breaks at the first shock. There's a second innocence, earned through scars, that of the adult who has been hurt, has known evil, has known disappointment, and even so, after all of it, chose once again to believe in people. That second innocence is incredibly rare, and it's the only one with authentic weight to it. The first is given to you. The second is earned in blood. Prince Mishkin is the indictment. Sonia is the rescue. Alyosha is the mature path. Together, the three characters form a portrait of something the modern world has unlearned how to recognize. The high intelligence of goodness. Not foolish goodness. Clear-eyed goodness. And here we reach the practical part. Because none of this is therapist couch theory. Dostoevsky was a writer, not a lecturer. He wanted the reader to come away from the book different. And that transformation, even though it sounds huge, begins with small, almost invisible gestures, scattered throughout your ordinary day. Trusting people, even knowing that every once in a while you're going to be let down. Accepting that the alternative, living suspicious of everybody all the time, costs you much more than a few isolated disappointments. Communities with high levels of trust have not only less crime, but also better health, better well-being, and even greater longevity. Constant suspicion costs a lot for everybody, including and especially the one doing the suspecting. Helping someone without calculating the return, without posting about it, without bringing it up later in a conversation, just helping and going on with life. This practice, ordinary as it looks, is a big rebellion against the logic of our time. Small acts of kindness, repeated regularly, increase the well-being of the person doing them in a measurable way. This isn't poetry. It's an observation repeated in decades of psychology research. Whoever helps comes home feeling lighter. Whoever only receives and never gives gets filled up with an anxiety that nobody can explain. Being honest when it would be more convenient to lie. Refusing the polite little lie that protects everybody from a difficult conversation. People who reduce the number of small lies in their daily lives report improvements in mood, in their relationships, and in their own physical health. Lying, even silly lying, has a silent cost that builds up on the shoulders and slowly wears away the trust a person has in themselves. Forgiving when the immediate logic says to hold a grudge. Not because you're a saint, but because carrying a grudge for years is one of the slowest forms of poisoning that exists. Therapeutic processes focused on forgiveness produce drops in depression and anxiety symptoms, and even improvements in cardiovascular markers. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a sophisticated form of health. It's the gesture of someone who recognizes that continuing to carry the weight of an offense only hurts the one doing the carrying, never the one who did the offending. Slowing down, stepping out every once in a while from the cycle of notifications running your mood, walking without earbuds, eating slowly, looking out the window, talking through to the end without rushing with someone who matters. Regular mindfulness practices, now recommended even inside hospitals and schools in several countries, show consistent effects in reducing stress and increasing perceived well-being. The act of simply being present without distraction in one place at a time has become a rarity. And what's rare costs a lot to practice. There's also a gesture that doesn't get talked about much, but that Dostoevsky considered decisive. The gesture of apologizing genuinely, not the social apology, automatic, given just to wrap up the subject. The adult apology, the one that acknowledges the harm caused, that doesn't invent excuses, that accepts the shame without putting up a defense. That kind of apology is rare because it requires bringing pride all the way down in a single instant, but it has an almost miraculous effect. It reopens dead conversations. It brings back together people who had already been written off. It gives back, both to the one apologizing and to the one receiving the apology, a feeling of fresh air that's hard to find anywhere else. Another underrated gesture is listening to someone without interrupting, without mentally preparing the next sentence, without comparing it to your own experience. Just listening through to the end. Decades of psychotherapy research show that when someone is genuinely listened to, without judgment, the changes are profound. People tend to reorganize themselves internally, find answers that seemed impossible, and see paths that had been buried under anxiety. Wholehearted listening is at once a small gesture and an enormous one. A gesture that has practically disappeared in a culture where everybody wants to talk, post, comment, give an opinion, and nobody wants to stay quiet for 2 minutes straight. Each of these gestures, on its own, looks ridiculously small, almost laughable, but it's precisely in that smallness that its strength lies. Each of these gestures is a small rebellion against an enormous logic. It's a silent vote against the disease Dostoevsky diagnosed. It's a way of going back home from the inside, even while still living on the very same street. And here we have to come back to the question left hanging earlier. How much of your freedom have you outsourced without realizing it? Maybe the honest answer is, a lot more than you'd like to admit. That's okay. The way back doesn't require some spectacular reversal. It requires small choices, repeated stubbornly, day after day, even when it seems like it doesn't make a difference. Maybe, after all of this, it'll be easier to understand why so many intelligent people walk away from a reading of this Russian author with the feeling of having been read on the inside. He wasn't writing about Tsarist Russia, He wasn't writing about some distant, vanished, irrelevant society. He was writing about something that's still happening in the apartment next to yours, on the Monday subway, in the car stuck in traffic, in the silence of the bedroom when everybody else has gone to sleep and the person is left alone with their own thoughts. His work has crossed borders in a way that's rare. It has been translated into more than 170 languages, read in nearly every country in the world, and has influenced thinkers in completely different fields, from psychology to philosophy, from literature to theology. This isn't literary folklore. It's the documented record of a man who touched a central nerve of human existence and keeps touching it, decade after decade, in readers who would never imagine themselves moved by a 19th century Russian. That nerve is still exposed. That disease is still spreading. And the remedy he pointed to is still available. No waiting list, no prescription, no financial cost. It's inside every small gesture in which a person decides, of their own free will, to stop pretending to be smarter than they are. They decide to stop hiding behind irony all the time, go back to looking people in the eye, choose to listen all the way through without rehearsing a reply, help someone without charging anything in return, and accept that the other person also has pain, even when the other person isn't showing it. The question that's left, now that the video is approaching its end, is just one. And it's a tough one. Do you still have the courage to be called naive? Can you still handle the discomfort of being the only one at the table who doesn't laugh at the cruel joke? Do you still have the strength to do the right thing even knowing nobody's going to applaud? Because that's exactly where, inside that discomfort, the way back lives. In a world that rewards cynicism, being good is an act of courage. Being simple, a quiet rebellion. Having a heart, the last truly clear-eyed gesture left. And what if, in the end, the idiots were right? What if real clear-headedness lives precisely in the people the world prefers to call naive? Maybe those idiots were right the whole time and we treated them badly without realizing it. One of them might still be in our life, waiting to be seen with new eyes. Or one of them might be us, hidden under years of learned armor. At this exact moment in your life, there's still time to stop pretending to be clever, lower the guard a little, and finally start living without a mask. If you enjoyed this reflection, consider becoming part of our members club. See you in the next video.